Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, and I am honored to be having with me in the studio for tonight to be focusing on the main topic for the Daily Debate for tonight is Ambassador Medhat Miligi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister and the former Ambassador of Egypt to Cameroon and the Central African Republic. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime, Mr. Ambassador. Of course, we are speaking and focusing tonight on the visit or the participation of Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry on behalf of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in the Non-Aligned Movement Summit in Uganda, and more specifically the capital Kampala. How would you see the main topics that were tackled during the past 2 days, and more specifically on Friday and Saturday regarding Egypt and Africa?
Well, there were several topics actually. First of all, the presence of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, although he wasn't there by himself, but I mean, choosing the Minister of Foreign Affairs to represent him, which means that the visit, after all, is on a presidential level, shows the importance that Egypt is giving to the non-alignment movement. I think that recently many countries have discovered the importance of this movement, although for some time it shaded out, but now it's regaining its importance due to several polarization and several conflicts around the world, and this gives the impression that we need something to get out of this polarization. And I think there is nothing better than a non-alignment movement to use to be the voice of so many countries. Let's not forget that we are talking about 120 members, which means 120 countries that are members in this movement that started since 5 decades, even more 6 decades, in 1961, when President Nasser and President Nehru, along with, of course, the famous Yugoslavian well, there is no Yugoslavia anymore, but Yugoslavian President Joseph Broz Tito, and they founded this non-alignment movement to get away from the polarization from the two superpowers back then. If we are going to talk about the Egyptian position in this summit, we have to understand that there were several topics, the most important topics, which are, first of all, of course, the current conflict on our eastern side, which we're talking, of course, about the brutal invasion and massacre that is going on in Gaza, and the necessity that those 120 countries unanimously express their voices in order for a ceasefire to this bloody war, and at the same time understand the necessity of retackling once again the peace process, something that has stopped for a long time, in order to end up with establishing a Palestinian state next to the Israeli one, as what we know as the two-state solution. This was the first thing that was tackled. The second issue, of course, it is the sovereignty of a neighboring country, which is Somalia. As we all know that Ethiopia chose to, instead of going to the legitimate government of Mogadishu to try to discuss a safe area for it to be on the Red Sea, they chose to discuss it with Somaliland, which is, as we know, is not a legitimate power in Somalia. And this actually will definitely destabilize, I mean, internally the situation in Somalia, and on another instance between Somalia and Ethiopia, since it cannot be recognized as a legitimate deal and a legal deal that was done with Somaliland. Of course, we will talk about this a little bit later. The third issue I think that was very important and tackled during the summit was the Sudanese issue. As we all know, we are talking about over 15,000 persons died, and we are talking about even 7 million or more that were forced to be displaced due to the war that is going on in Sudan. Unfortunately, it's a civil war, but at the same time, it's a proxy war for several other factors and members who are using Sudan, one of the richest countries in the Arab world and in Africa, to be the battle place of their wars. We know that there are several countries who are encouraging this war in order to benefit from the wealth of Sudan. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Shoukry, insisted on the importance of having a dialogue between the main two radical parties in Sudan in order to reach solution and reach a peace agreement between them to formulate a strong government to be able to to reach the aspiration of the Sudanese people into a safe and peaceful country. So I think those are the most important issues, among others. Of course, as you know, the Minister of Foreign Affairs had several meetings, bilateral meetings with many others.
Yes.
I mean, he met with the Djibouti counterpart, he met with the Ugandan counterpart, he met with the Indian, with the Belarusian, and many others actually, which shows the importance that Egypt is giving to this, and the several strong ties and relations that we are having with different and various parts of the world.
Yes, the ties and relations between Egypt and Africa have been prosperous under the tenure of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, as today we have seen a meeting between President al-Sisi and his counterpart from Somalia. As you've mentioned, Mr. Ambassador, one of the main topics that were tackled during the non-alignment movement in Uganda is the issue between Somalia and Ethiopia and the agreement that you have mentioned previously during the episode. How do you see the importance of today's meeting between President al-Sisi and the President of Somalia?
Well, it's a very important meeting for several reasons and so for several levels.
Yes.
Actually, the most important one is to show how Egypt is committed to the international law and how it respects the international law. And from this perspective, the President himself chose to meet with his counterpart from Somalia just to express our solidarity with the Somalian legitimate government, and that we do not accept any unilateral movements that undermine the sovereignty of Somalia. I mean, it's not a secret that we personally had a problem with these unilateral movements done by Ethiopia before, when we are talking about the construction of the dam, which is known as the Renaissance Dam. And Egypt, from the first day, have insisted on the importance of respecting the transboundaries waters between countries and how this should be respected within the frame of the international law. And unfortunately, so far, we couldn't succeed, and many other players tried to convince Ethiopia of the repercussions and the negative impact of these unilateral movements economically and socially, and even on the relation of neighborhood between Egypt and, or between even Ethiopia and its neighbors. Let's not forget, it's not just about Egypt. We have two countries that have been touched because of this, which is Sudan and Egypt. Of course, Sudan, due to its internal problem, is not one active player on this front right now, but Egypt is assuming the responsibility, not just because its own interests are in danger, but simply because this is a violation of the international law. And we have always been asking our friends in Ethiopia that the solution is not by taking unilateral movement,
yes,
but to have serious negotiations in order to have an abiding rules to follow for the working and for the process of the whole dam, which so far haven't given any fruits. As we know that recently we had to stop the fourth round of negotiations since it's fruitless, and that Ethiopia insists on taking its own measures according to its own interest, regardless of any other country in the region.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, as you've mentioned, one of the key words here is the unilateral move that is being taken by Ethiopia on different levels with different players in the region, as we can see nowadays with Somalia, before that with Egypt and Sudan, the neighboring countries. This is inexplicable. How would you explain those moves, especially that those political moves are being taken over different administrations as well in the history of Ethiopia? It's not just being linked to one president or one prime minister or one administration in Ethiopia. And the second question, you've mentioned that we are respecting the international law. We are showing solidarity with Somalia. Of course, Somalia could be showing solidarity and support to us in the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam issue as well between Egypt and Ethiopia and Sudan. But what is the next step? Is it just a political movement, or do you think those political movements and this political support could be translated on the ground as soon as possible?
Well, this is a very tricky question, actually, the second one I mean.
Yes.
But let's start with the first one. When we are talking about this unilateral movements and unilateral behavior that is being done by Ethiopia, I think the key word, and not just regarding Ethiopia, but in many other cases and many other issues and many other countries, which is the impunity. When a country knows that it can go without any consequences of what it's doing, it continues doing what it's doing, thinking that this is its own patriotism and nationalism to do whatever it's in interest of its own own thinking.
Yes.
Egypt was never an advocate for that and never did it. I mean, even if you go throughout history, you will never find either Egypt attacking other countries or the sovereignty of other countries. This is not the behavior of Egyptians. Maybe other countries, yes, but not Egypt. However, the principle of impunity encourages many countries to take this. I mean, if we see what's going on in Gaza right now, it's the same rule. The impunity that Israel feels makes it and encourages it to continue with the genocide that is taking place in Gaza. Why it isn't stopping? Do you think because they don't have morals? No, because they think that this is being patriot to the Israeli nation. And since nobody is forcing Israel to comply with the international law, then it will continue its violation. Ethiopia is doing the same thing. We even tried to go to the United Nations Security Council, and they failed to draw a resolution condemning the unilateral movement of Ethiopia.
Yes.
And I think that this is the main principle, and when the international community will respect the international law and forces countries who do not abide by international law to respect it, that's when we are going to see that these unilateral movements are going to stop, and these genocides are going to stop, and this violation of all kind of international humanitarian law are going to stop as well. This is regarding the first question that you asked. As for the second one, I think it's a very good question. What is going to be the step? We are committed to peace. We are committed to peaceful and political negotiations with the Ethiopian. We have to continue doing so, but we have to have in our back mind that if the situation comes to the worst, we will do whatever measure we have to take in order to restore our rights. We are not going to attack anyone. We are not going to behave in any aggressive way, but we have to protect our interests. We are talking about over 110 persons living in Egypt. If we add another 9 million of refugees and people who are living in Egypt as well, so we're talking around 120 million people. They will not die of thirst simply because another country do not want to respect the international law regarding the transboundaries rivers. This is not just the Egyptian point of view. This is the international law that we all have to respect. And we hope that Ethiopia will come to its senses and understand that it's in own interest to respect the international law, because in this case even we can help with the development and the economic development that they are seeking. We even offer this. And it's not going to be the first time. One of the meetings that His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, had during the summit in Uganda was with the Tanzanian Foreign Minister. And of course, we all know that Egypt is helping to build one of the biggest dams in Africa, Julius Nyerere, exactly, in Tanzania. So this shows that we are not against, although that Tanzania is one of the Nile Basin countries, but it is not about preventing those countries from having the economic development they are seeking. They are entitled to aspire for that, but at the same time, without any damage to other countries that will follow using the same river.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, of course, you mentioned that there are a number of topics that were tackled during the non-alignment movement in Uganda. One of them that is affecting Egypt directly and indirectly is the aggression by Israel against Palestine in general, and more specifically against Gaza nowadays. How do you see the stance and the speeches and the statements made by Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry during participating in this important summit in Uganda?
Well, honestly, I mean, the position of Egypt, represented here by His Excellency Minister Sameh Shoukry, I think came as no surprise to anyone. It's the same position that Egypt reiterates once after the other, and even the President himself has reiterated the same position. My main concern is not those statements that we heard before, because this is the Egyptian position that we all accept and respect. However, the most important thing is the other players, the one who really support Israel. And I want to say here that the narrative has to change a little bit. The idea of that Israel is defending itself and accordingly it has the right to do whatever it pleases to defend itself, this is not acceptable. First of all, there is no right of defend itself when it's a colonial power.
Yes.
I mean, you lose this right once you become a colonial power in any piece of land. Second, there is always this idea of that, I mean, especially in Western media and with Western governments, that the whole issue started the 7th of October. Actually, 7th of October was merely a reaction to decades of suppression and decades of humiliation from Israel to the Palestinian. This was the reaction. Actually, it is not what Israel is doing now. The reaction was what the Palestinians have done the 7th of October, and we have to understand this. We do believe in peace, and this is a very important thing. And let me tell you how I know that we do believe in peace. Egypt and many other countries, if not all countries, nobody is saying that it's encouraging the Palestinians by giving them weapons. But read just in any simple newspaper the many countries that are supplying Israel with weapons, although it is the colonial side of the story. And this is a little bit amazing. This is the narrative I'm talking about. This is now the country that is committing the genocide, that is committing war crimes. It's the one that openly getting arms and munitions and supplies of tanks and aeroplanes and every weapon you can imagine. While the Palestinian, the oppressed one, the occupied one, nobody is giving them any weapons, which shows that we are committed to peace, while others are not committed to peace because they're encouraging Israel to continue its war. And that will bring us also to another issue that is very important, the trial that is taking place in The Hague right now.
Yes.
If Israel will be condemned, then it's not just Israel that is condemned. According to the law, any country that helped Israel to commit this genocide is in complicity with it, which means that the countries that helped Israel with weapons are partners and are as accountable as Israel is. So I think it's not in anybody's interest to have many countries, many respectable and big countries and developed countries that are accused also of crime of genocide. And this is going to be the worst thing that could happen. That's why we hear a lot about pressures that are being done to the court in order not to incriminate and condemn Israel, which would be a shame to the international community if anything like that happens. And I don't think the world will be the same if this will happen.
Yes, Ambassador Medhat Miligy, allow me just to go to the other report of the daily debate for tonight, which focuses on the foreign affairs of Egypt and the bilateral links between Egypt and the Arab countries, as Egypt is keen on boosting the joint Arab action in the near future. All this and more in the upcoming report, so stay tuned.
Egypt has permanently been keen on supporting joint Arab action, not through slogans, but rather actual actions that serve interests of all Arab peoples. Egypt views Arab unity as a shared factor that was proved by geographical and historical facts along with civilization background between Egypt and the Arab states. President Fattah Sisi was never reluctant to respond to any Arab call and sought to settle any crises and problems that could lead to a better life for all Arab peoples. The ultimate objective for President Sisi and other Arab states is to settle all Arab problems that have been accumulating over the past decades. It is most appropriate that the objectives of all Arabs is to push forward a swift and specific action to settle all crises for good. He made it clear that Egypt has a certain agenda to float to review a number of ideas, axes, and important issues that will be raised. One of such key axes is necessity of intensifying Arab efforts towards achieving a real unity. Integration among the Arab states is important in order to reach clear and common objectives. The Middle East and Arab region are witnessing complicated regional and international challenges as Sudanese crisis takes its toll on the region and the situation in Palestine is witnessing serious escalation. Also, Syria seeks to restore its seat at the Arab League and to help settle the Syrian crisis. Concerning the Sudanese crisis, the spokesman explained that Egypt has been calling for providing humanitarian assistance to the Sudanese people and stabilizing the current truce to reach a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, and I am honored to be having with me in the program for tonight Ambassador Medhat Miligy, the former Assistant Foreign Minister and the former Ambassador of Egypt to Cameroon and the Central African Republic. Thank you very much once again for being with us tonight. We're speaking more about Gaza and Palestine and the aggression that is taking place by Israel against the Gazans and the Palestinians in general over the past few decades. Over the past couple of days, we have seen some statements made by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres saying that the Palestinians deserve to be having their own state and everyone should be recognizing that. How would you see such a statement and the importance of it regarding its timing?
Well, I think this is once again a repetition of other declarations made by the United Nations previously,
yes,
which many resolutions are debating this issue. So it comes as no surprise that he is repeating the same position. Having said that, I think the most important thing is the position of the American President Biden, who said in different wording, but the same idea, which is the right of Palestinians to have their own state. Although I'm usually skeptical about the United States declarations, because I'm more concerned about what they do more than what they say.
Yes.
Because actually they say this and they are completely in favor of a Palestinian state. However, everything they do contradicts this statement. I mean, you cannot, we know that Israel is in a state of, is in a hysteric state, actually, what's going on.
Yes.
I mean, nothing stops Israel from continuing the war crime of genocide that is being perpetrated over the Palestinians in the last 3 months, over 100 days, as we know. And the United States, on another stand, actually, it blocks the Security Council from obtaining a resolution over a ceasefire. So I mean, what is exactly the position of the United States here? We are a little bit confused because you are asking for a two-state solution, but at the same time, you don't want to have a ceasefire and you veto it. And you are the only one. And you are even isolating yourself from the international community by insisting on Israel continuing its war on the Palestinians. And by the way, this is something very important. We have to say it's the war against the Palestinians and not against Hamas, as the Western media usually try to portray it as if it is just directed to Hamas. Actually, it's directed.
A collective punishment.
Exactly. So you cannot just say Hamas. You have to say the Palestinian people. So I think that it's quite important what the American president have mentioned 2 days ago, which was actually a big controversy between, as we heard, between the American president and the Israeli prime minister. And I think that the idea of the American administration is to try to cool down the situation by just waving a hope of an independent Palestinian state so that things can calm down a little bit on the Palestinian side. But the reality is that, you know, this state will not be effective overday. It will take months and months, if not years, until it's established. So I think the American administration wants just to pass this electoral year. As we all know that by the end of this year we'll have elections, and the position of President Biden is not in its best form. So this is the idea. It's to speak about the Palestinian state, independent state, while it will never happen during the time of this administration that will end up by the elections. As we all know, that there is no serious decision that are taken during the last year of American presidency. But at the same time, even though that this is not doable during this time, but nevertheless, the Israeli Prime Minister objected it and refused it in public and said that, in other wordings, that the White House is lying and that I did not give my approval to this plan. So now we see a beginning of divergence between the position of the United States and Israel, but the core of it is that there is no divergence. They are both committed to continue this massacre. I'm sorry to say this, but if we know that Israel is committing a massacre against the Palestinian, and yet I'm still giving it arms and weapons and munition, that means that I'm supporting the cause. And even that I am saying otherwise, I am deep down supporting the cause by my acts and not by my words. The second thing is the rest of the international community. We have to understand and we have to realize that the public opinion, especially in the West, is changing. It's shifting now. For the first time in decades, we see a new public opinion that are in favor for a Palestinian state and to stop the crimes committed against the Palestinian. And I think the reason for that is the new era that we are living in, which is the internet and the media that it brings.
More awareness, more information.
Exactly, more information and different source of information. This is the most important thing. The old generations are usually getting their information from TV, radio, and so on, which is programmed to give a certain narrative to the public. Okay, but the youngsters and the youth and many people who are following the internet can have other source of information, and accordingly they can see the reality. And that's why we see this shift in position. The question here is this position going to force the governments to shift its position or not? This is the debate that we are going to see in the future. It takes some time. It does not come overnight, but it will happen eventually because people are more aware of the rightness and the legitimacy of the Palestinian people to defend themselves and to defend their right to have an independent state. But it is not going to be an easy war. As we have all seen recently, there is a kind of confusion in the Western governments. I mean, you see demonstrations, hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating in the streets, while someone could be let out of his work and fired from his work simply because he is wearing a pin with the Palestinian flag.
Or a social media post.
Or a social media post. So, I mean, what should we believe? I mean, they are still confused. They don't know how to deal with this new situation. Traditionally, everybody was supporting Israel. It's a teeny enclave between many Arabs who are not respecting the right of the Jews and the suffering they went through the Second World War. And that's why even we see Germany now siding with Israel in front of South Africa in The Hague. And this was actually not a surprise because they have this complex, let's say, of the atrocities committed by their ancestors during the Second World War. And here I want just to use this platform to whisper in their ear, you are not responsible for what your ancestors did. You cannot continue for the rest of your lives thinking that you are guilty of what happened in the past. This was the guilt of whoever committed this, but you are not as guilty as you think you are.
Yes, of course, Mr. Ambassador also spoke about the topic that was discussed during the non-alignment movement with the participation of Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, which is the Sudanese conflict nowadays, which of course we have seen the spotlight taken just gradually away from Sudan to Gaza and Palestine. What is going on in Sudan nowadays, and more specifically over the past 4 months, ever since the aggression by Israel in Gaza broke out on October the 7th? What is happening in Sudan, and how can this be affecting directly and indirectly Egypt?
Well, several things. First of all, as you just mentioned, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict actually drew the camera and drew the importance and neglected a little bit the Sudanese cause, especially because it's like a civil war. So it's between Sudanese,
yes,
while the Palestinian-Israeli issue is between two countries or two races, let's say.
Yes.
And this is what gives it its depth. Having said that, of course, the atrocities that have been committed there is, as there's some reports, some independent reports are reporting it, is very dangerous. And second, at the end of the day, the killer and the one who died are both Sudanese. So far, 13,000 or even 15,000 persons lost their lives. Approximately even over 500,000 of them are refugees in Egypt and, of course, other neighboring countries. And the situation become very volatile. And unfortunately, it's only up to the Sudanese to find a solution. But having said that, we have not to forget the role that has been played by some countries that I will not name, they know themselves, that are actually encouraging the parties to continue this bloody war in order to benefit from the wealth of Sudan once this war is over. I mean, this is a proxy war, as we all know. I mean, we know for sure that many of the players in this war are getting their weapons, are getting their munition,
yes,
are getting their money from externally helping countries to have this conflict to go on. Unfortunately, this is not the right behavior. But at the same time, we hope that the Sudanese will one day stop this thinking and start to realize that they are both losing here, and that we don't want another division of Sudan. We've seen the first one between Sudan and South Sudan. We hope that there will not be another division, which was one of many dreams by some forces who doesn't want any stabilization in the region. Egypt is trying its best. It's trying to help because of the strategic relations. We are taking as many as we can from
yes,
the Sudanese refugees, which is actually putting an extra weight on our weak economy. But at the same time, we are convinced that the Sudanese are the only people who can help themselves to get out of this misery. Unfortunately, other countries are encouraging this the other way around. And Egypt, although it's the first player that is meant and will be the first one who will be affected by what's going in Sudan, is not playing this game by adding more fuel to the fire in order to benefit at the end from this war.
Yes.
No, we want a strong Sudan, a Sudan that is a neighboring, peaceful country, and we don't want to have on our border. I mean, if you see the map, Egypt is surrounded by 3 volatile places. I mean, Libya, things are not yet settled 100%. In Sudan, we just talked about,
yes,
and Palestine as well. So the only area
yes,
that we have left is the Mediterranean, and we hope it will stay calm
yes,
until further notice.
Yes, Ambassador Medhat Miligy, the former Assistant Foreign Minister and the former Ambassador of Egypt to Cameroon and the Central African Republic. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Anytime. And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.